Any thoughts?
Well, just to carry on from Ron's part, when you talked about that person that's just slightly ahead, I believe getting support from people who have done something before, and I've used the analogy in the past that I did a charity climb of Mount Kilimanjaro, and people say, well, it was really difficult. I said, well, it wasn't actually that difficult because I was being helped by someone who does it 30 times a year. And without them, it would have been extraordinarily difficult. Whereas I did some sailing across some lake in America and done that before, and I wouldn't have done it without someone who actually knew what they were doing. I'd never been sailing before. So I think the issue is finding someone who's been where you're going and ask them how they got there, and ask them, and I think Scotland's a tremendous place for that to happen. Formalising that may actually be a bit formalised. Coaching and mentoring might be a bit of an oxymoron, but I do think we have the right structures, we have the right mentality, and so I think we've got everything going for us.
Okay. What Brian didn't tell you is the fire walk was after the Mount Kilimanjaro walk.
During.
Still frozen.
I was going to ask people what they felt some of the hurdles were, but I want to turn it on its head given what today is out with this room and what the theme is. So I'm going to ask a question, then I'll let Murray ask a question, but I'll give you all a few minutes to think about your views, but can you all have a think about what you think the opportunities are for you and business in the new year and beyond? And after Murray's question, we'll come back and see what people's views are. Murray?
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? My name is Murray Buchanan. I was an IP lawyer for 15 years, and I also worked for Richard Branson and set up a division for him in 30 countries, so I know what that journey is like. I've been talking to a lot of people recently just because I've had a bit more time than I've ever had, and it's interesting that when you speak to the universities, they say there's not enough capital for the spin-outs. When you speak to the VCs, they say the management teams aren't strong enough. And then they all overestimate the difficulties of accessing international markets. And I think really therein lies the challenges. And I completely agree with what Brian was saying about there's nothing really quite like working alongside people who have done it before. And I think there's a lot to be said for trying to focus resources towards that. There's a fantastic provision of information within Scotland, and I think it's probably richer than anywhere else within the UK. And there's certainly no problem with the quality of our ideas, our creativity, our innovation, our invention is in the very Premier League worldwide. But I think we need to get these other things right, and if we can do that, we'll be in a much better position. Just the last point I wanted to make was about entrepreneurs. It's a cliche, but I think as a country we probably have suffered in the past from not having an awful lot or enough confidence in ourselves, but I think that's coming. And one of the things I've enjoyed most over the last couple of weeks is speaking to people who are involved in education in early years and organisations like the Young Enterprise Scheme. Listening to them talk about the work they're doing with young people, many of them disadvantaged but not necessarily, who are learning to be entrepreneurs without even knowing it. So, 10 or 15 years' time, watch what happens.
Okay, thanks, Murray. Just very quickly before I come back to the audience, could I ask all of our panellists just for a brief response to some of Murray's points? Bob?
Well, I'd better introduce myself. It's not a response, it's just to say that my involvement in this has been basically regarding the BSI and its guidance. There's a standard called BS 7000, which I was involved in many years ago when I was a lecturer at Glasgow University on innovation management. It is a document that shows companies how to manage innovation within their organisations. And latterly, my involvement now is I chair a new committee, and the standard will be published next year on ethical services to invention. There's been a lot of rip-offs. By example, Channel 4 got an idea in this number. That was an example that created a need for a standard on ethical services to inventors. And that standard will be produced next year. sorry to introduce that, but it helps to give the involvement.
I'd only, sorry, you finished.
Okay.
I'd only pick up on I couldn't agree more. We actually have to start with instilling the new mindset in younger people. And it is the mindset. I often find it bizarre to be talking about this because, I mean, I spent my life as a bureaucrat. I mean, it's almost a contradiction in terms to talk of an innovative bureaucrat. But in fact, the UK IPO had to change because it was quite clear that its business model would no longer fit. So it had to find a new market, and the advisory staff, all of that, spun out of a new business model. So we do need new mindsets. They happen by accidents. You know, people do pop up. There's some kind of genetic throwback. I think that's probably what I was in the bureaucracy. But actually encouraging young people to create, to work together as a team, to deliver a product or service is, I think, the way forward. And as you say, there's a lot happening both in Scotland and in the rest of the UK. And it's that. We'll see the benefit in a few years' time. In the meantime, we have to encourage businesses, because I think partly your question, I put it differently. You said, what is the future for business? I actually think that's almost impossible to answer. The real question is, what is the future for businesses? Because there isn't a model for all. Each and every entrepreneur or innovator is looking to satisfy something in the marketplace that they think they can fill. So that's all I would add.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
I'd just pick up on Murray's point there about capital, the lack of capital available, lack of debt. It's probably, as far as I see it, I did a lot of business recovery last year, and the lack of funds is the biggest single challenge, I think, facing business. If you have a profit margin of 10%, notwithstanding the cash flow implications, you can't grow it any more than 10%. So I had people, seen people who had customers striving for more business. Clients couldn't take orders because they didn't have the availability of funds. So I think that's the biggest challenge. However, necessity is the mother of invention. So solutions will be driven out. We already see private lenders in a collective getting together to cut out the banking institutions. They feel their pound of lending is going towards the business rather than the carpet on your way upstairs in a bank. So they actually believe they're getting more bang for their buck. And I think there will be a drive. My recommendation to the banks is to bring in legislation that makes a bank a bit of an oxymoron, an entrepreneurial bank. I believe a certain percentage of their lending should be unsecured, and they should be forced down that legislative route in order to have bank relationship managers understand businesses from a business perspective rather than understand them from the ratio that credit control will ultimately decide whether they get funds or not. So someone has to stimulate and drive that change, and I think banks are the custodians of our funds, and actually they should be driven through legislation. So I do think in all of that, what Murray said is, this is the biggest single challenge, I think, and it looks like it's the good old arrow impossible. How do you grow when you don't have money and you need money to grow? But I think solutions will come out the marketplace.
Okay. I think it's another good example of how everyone needs to be ambitious for Scotland, because there is a mechanism where there's a codependency. And I think, again, the past couple of years have highlighted that more than ever before. We don't work or operate in silos. Yes, we have our own areas of expertise, but the level of codependency that exists cannot be underestimated. And again, for business and businesses, the role of banks and how they operate and how they think is going to be critical to the marketplace. I'm conscious of time, so I will come back to the audience, as I said I would, to ask for just people's views on what you think some of the opportunities are. Gentleman at the back just there.
Cremine Bank.
Is that working? Yeah, okay. Maurice Alfandry from Collar IP. And I've been working with the Intellectual Asset Centre for some 3 years now, covering a broad range of industries. I'd just like to pick up on something Brian said about the banks, and I'm not going to defend the banks because I think they're abhorrent, as everyone else in the audience probably does. But one of the issues with banks and accountants and lawyers is that, and I'm not having a go at any of those groups, but their area of expertise is focused on the services that they provide. So that's where they make their money, and that's how they generate wealth for the employees within those businesses. Entrepreneurs, on the other hand, in order to secure the funds, have got to be able to better articulate what it is they are doing and why, in order to get the confidence of those people. And having worked with lots of businesses, not just in Scotland, but other areas, the biggest difficulty people have is being able to paint that vision for where they want their business to be and why that is a credible vision. And so what I'm saying is that what people need is a lot more mentoring in Scotland in what I would call the traditional sales skills and the ability to articulate in pictures so that they create the vision. Once you've created that vision, you can get the buy-in much more easily than otherwise you might. And unless you can do that, it doesn't matter how good your idea, I don't think you will ever be able to succeed. If you can't do it yourselves, you need to bring in the right people to enable you to do the articulation. One other point I'd maybe like to pick up on, and I think Scotland has done a fantastic job in supporting its industries. But if I may, I'd like to maybe give a word of suggestion to those powers that be at the highest levels in Scottish enterprise and higher, maybe even the Scottish government. And that is that there is an awful lot of support for SMEs in Scotland, and actually a lot of that support is given by different agencies who start to trip over each other. And if you look at the life of any successful business, from the sowing of that first seed through germination, through growth to the oak with all the branches, at each of those different stages of development, it has a need for different support and different skills. And so at the moment, what you've got all the support organisations in Scotland targeting largely the same market sectors, largely the same businesses, but there's no joined up thinking going on behind where does one organisation start and hand over to the next. If you could get that continuity right, then I think Scotland has a fantastic future. I'm not saying you're doing things badly now, I'm just saying you could do things a hell of a lot better.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. I'd like to turn it on its head slightly and take from that the opportunity is less bureaucracy, less overlap, and a lot more focused strategic thinking. Could I pass over to the lady on the left here for the final comments, and then we'll wind up?
Okay, I'm Maria Weir from the Intellectual Asset Centre, and I've got a different challenge, which is how do we get the citizenships of Scotland to actually stop knocking Scottish business? Because actually this is about an attitudinal thing. In Scotland we're great at tearing things down. We're super critical, so there's lots of good businesses out there who do have confidence, but their confidence gets warped because every time they think they're going to say great things about themselves, people go, who do they think they are? I knew them when they were children. We have very much that attitude in Scotland. So we have a citizenship issue about how do we all become ambitious for Scotland and start to support each other and our businesses, not just expecting businesses to be confident. We all have to be confident about what businesses can do. And it's interesting that our international people were all saying how good things were happening in Scotland. We're very, very critical of ourselves.
Thank you for those comments. I would say I don't think it's particularly just within Scotland. I think there is the Scottish cringe, which I'm pleased to see most people left out the door today. But I think this is an issue facing the rest of the UK. The number of successful business people, other professionals in other areas within the UK who have decided to go to America or Europe to escape that public knocking of their success. So I don't think it's particular to Scotland. Yes, it exists. I suspect it's lead by example that will be there. It's one of these intangibles that's difficult to change. I'm conscious of time, so before passing over to Ian to wind up for the last 5-10 minutes, could you please join me in thanking our panellists?